Welcome to the podcast number two of the CRA for Broadcast, where we're looking at how the Cyber Resilience Act is going to affect broadcasters, manufacturers, system integrators, resellers, really the whole industry. And would like to welcome Jamie Horner from Providius today, as well as myself, David Kaszycki with Beam Dynamics, to talk a little bit deeper. Providius has been doing some really interesting things in the space. We've been chatting for a couple of years, Jamie, on ways we can collaborate. But I thought this was a very great topic that I know is something that you're looking into and thinking about. But if you don't mind, maybe just give us a quick background on yourself and Providius, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, great. Thanks, David. Jamie Horner, as David's pointed out, Jamie Horner, I am the SVP here at Providius. My main focus is on strategy for the company, sort of looking at the future and looking at the different industries and the directions they're taking. And we've been working closely with Beam, as David's pointed out. And this subject specifically that David introduced us to, and that we were vaguely aware of in the market, is this initiative by the EU under the Cyber Resiliency Act. So this is a very, very interesting subject, and one that definitely dovetails with Providius's activity, I think, as well as Beam's activity. And the best way to describe Providius is we've taken on the challenge or stepped into the role of providing real-time observability for live mission critical environments, right? So definitely that kind of focus definitely aligns us with live broadcast, right? So certainly that is a big part of our market today. We have many media companies using Providius in our observability suite. And so, yeah, our focus for the last several years has really been in trying to help solve that visibility problem, specifically visibility into the network. And I think, again, this subject is super interesting. We've all talked about cybersecurity. I think, it's been a subject. I've been on panels in the past. We did a panel a couple of years ago at NAB, for instance, talking about cybersecurity. This definitely puts a fine point to it. So I think that this subject, this law, I guess, the CRA law that the EU is passing, is extremely significant. And I think it's really interesting to explore this subject with Beam, as I think both of our companies are aligned strategically and in an integration way to help assist, and maybe even beyond help. I think we can solve some of the challenges that vendors, integration companies, consultants, et cetera, are going to face when the CRA Resiliency Act comes to fruition.
And it's coming out fast because by the letter of the law, the vulnerability reporting by manufacturers, a forced 24-hour notice period from when the vulnerability is there to reporting it is starting on September 11th of this year, 2026. And then the full compliance is supposed to be the end of 2027. So, I mean, we're talking about, 6 months to go until manufacturers need to start, pushing the vulnerabilities and notifying, and then obviously the full compliance is later. And from your perspective, Jamie, you've really been at the forefront of the shift towards IP-based infrastructure within broadcast environments. Outside of just the CRA itself, what have you seen a shift over the last few years of the types of challenges that these new environments are causing for companies, the types of roles that are there? Because I know you have much broader perspective on, cybersecurity and what, the CIOs and CISOs are looking into. Maybe you could give a little bit of a insight of how that shift has been over the last, 5 to 10 years, and why, that's probably why Proteus, exists today is part of that reason.
Yeah, absolutely. I think most organizations, whether you're a broadcaster, a media company, a broadcast vendor, a manufacturer, software company, I think a lot of the industry thinks of the cyber problem as a new problem, due to the advent or the introduction of this shift from baseband to IP, right? So moving infrastructure from video audio per cable SDI, for instance, analog to an IP infrastructure, what now has become a pretty common standard, which is simply 2110. So I think the industry is aware now that these devices are connected to a network, because these devices, whether they're physical or software, are utilizing that infrastructure to move media. Um, it definitely obviously brings awareness, but I also think it's an interesting subject because I don't know that simply 2110 has made things more risky necessarily on its own. If you think back, going back even 10 years, right, or even 15 years potentially, if you looked at a broadcast facility, they had a lot of control and management, over the network. I mean, the utilization of, say, physical GPI, GPO to control things, sort of, that was something that has been replaced, and that's been replaced over a decade ago by a network, right? By IP, communicating you via API versus using physical triggers, management control. Now almost every device has a web browser. So although SMPTE 2110 introduced connectivity of devices for the purposes of sharing media, certainly the networking of devices in a broadcast facility isn't entirely new. So I don't think that 2110 necessarily made things more risky. I think we're just more acutely aware that bigger networks, I think perhaps the scale has certainly increased. So how many things are on a single network, that's certainly increased. And of course, when we start talking about cybersecurity, when you start to scale and you have many more things, they refer to that as the lateral attack surface grows, right? So your exposure to risk is increased, the more things you have connected to a single network. But it's a really interesting topic because, we, of course, talk about observability, and a lot of a lot of the projects, that we're involved in are definitely 2110 based projects, because understanding the media, the timing, and the devices or the software that makes up that environment, of course, are very critical to ensure success and successful outcomes. And then when you step back and think about it from a security point of view, those same capabilities and traits that are in our product lines, the ability to observe those environments, become also equally as important when you think about it from the cybersecurity perspective. And so I don't know that we necessarily should say delineate the cyber problem is a problem only for broadcast environments or media environments that are using 2110. I would say that any broadcast environment that is running a control or management network, yeah, regardless if it's a file-based network or it's even an analog or SDI-based solution, I'm sure there's still networked devices there, and so therefore that this Cyber Resiliency Act still applies, and to me that effectively means that everyone, regardless of your infrastructure, if you're a media company, a broadcast company, this is a serious subject. This is something that you're going to significantly need to pay attention to. Obviously, if you're in the EU, right? So, I mean, we are talking about this is a European Union mandate, one that obviously affects European broadcasters specifically. But of course, the effects ripple as many vendors in the broadcast market, operate both in Europe, outside of Europe. There are obviously a lot of North American-based companies, Latin American companies in Asia, and other parts of the world, right? So the significance is far-reaching for sure. And like I said, I think to put a fine point, I wouldn't say that this is only a problem for media companies or broadcasters who are purchasing vendor equipment for an IP infrastructure. I think the second you connect it to the network, that's where this new framework apply, or not framework, but this new act applies.
And from a, so obviously, part of the mandate is there's going to be theoretically a large list of every vulnerability across every potential device out there. I think, as you and I both know very well, most, even if there was a list of here's a vulnerability for this device, I think a lot of uh, broadcasters or companies in general, one, don't know what they own. Like, does that affect their specific model number or their specific version of software? I think like just the inventory perspective. And then the second is, even if they didn't know that, they don't really know how those things are connected with each other. And how I know Providius is very deep into, observability from a broad perspective or bridging the observability gap. How does, the inventory is one side of it, certainly, but then from the observability, what else is this connected to? How is it talking to other devices? How does Providius play into that? And what is the thinking of, how is your tool going to help broadcasters better understand where the potential vulnerabilities are? I guess, what are you doing today now outside of the CRA, but with vulnerabilities or detecting those?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, I think specifically when we talk about vulnerabilities, you know, I guess just to kind of unpack that a little bit, um, a product, choose your product of choice for a broadcast environment. Could be a camera, production switcher, a server, etc. Inside that product, there is a CPU. And that CPU is there to to manage the device, to carry out activities on that device. It's obviously very dedicated to purpose, but that CPU also has an underlying operating system. And in that operating system, there are software components being employed, right? Maybe a lot of proprietary software for that specific role and task, but let's say a web server, right? Not many manufacturers or software companies are going to write their own web server. So a lot of times they're going to employ a off-the-shelf web server, right? So they're going to go and either open source it or purchase a web service, right, that they can employ as a library, as a SDK, et cetera, within their product. So you have operating systems that are coming off the shelf, right? So it may be something in a Linux, fit and form. It could be Windows, it could be Android. So you have these, these are not the vendors necessarily, the manufacturers. These are elements that they are sourcing, bringing in because they don't want to write them from scratch, or a lot of them, avoid doing that because it's a lot of work. So when you think of a specific product or device in a broadcast chain, there is this list of ingredients, right, that make up that product. I think it's referred to as an SBOM, or a software bill of materials. So it's even far more complicated than saying this device has these vulnerabilities. Yep. This device has these ingredients or these software components that it's using as part of its operation. And each one of those software components could, or should, or will have a vulnerability. That could be an exploited vulnerability, meaning someone has discovered there is a vulnerability in that particular software with that particular version. They've been able to exploit it in the wild, meaning someone in a lab. So there's a known gap in the security of that element. And now if you think about that, now you need to know, as the the owner of that, whether you're the manufacturer that owns the product, or if you're someone who's purchased that product, or you're the company that's imported that product, or you're the company that's integrated that product, you now must know not only what products are on your network, but what software components those products are all running. And then if there are any reported vulnerabilities for any of those software ingredients or components within that product. So it is an onion. And I think this is this is exactly where Providius and Beam really showcase the value of what our two companies provide to this industry. So starting from the Beam perspective, keeping track of that inventory, keeping track of that SBOM or that software bill of materials for each one of those devices that the client owns, and then also tracking the reported CVE or listed vulnerability for the components. Now, once that's being tracked or announced or captured in some update, then the next challenge is, okay, do I have these products currently in my network? And that's where Providius comes in. So Providius, through our real-time telemetry, we gather from the network environment, we are able to discover exactly the devices, software, physical devices, etc., on the network, where they're connected, who they're communicating with. And so if a vulnerability is reported or discovered and announced, there is now the process of, okay, how does this affect us? Where are these products deployed? How many do we own? What parts of our media environment are these products deployed in? Because you must now remediate for that problem, whether you isolate the device, i.e. bringing it off your network so it's no longer exposed to the rest of your environment, or you must go through a remediation plan if there's one available. So let's say a new firmware or a new software has been released now with a patch, you need to implement that. You need to understand that first you have to take that component out of commission, at least for the temporary time that takes to upgrade, or if you have to isolate it. And in a live production environment, that doesn't, there isn't a lot of opportunity to go and start upgrading products, right? So you have to do this in a very strategic and scheduled way. So now you have to consider the impact. So if I bring these things offline, how do they impact the rest of my media operation? And, what does it mean to us if we can't, right? So, again, not everything necessarily can be patched. I think, one of the problem statements here is eventually things become end of life. They become deprecated. And if there's a vulnerability that's been reported on a deprecated or end of life device, there is no new firmware update coming from the manufacturer. There is no software patch coming from that. They no longer support the product. You now must move away from that product and replace it with a new version of that product or a different one. So now you're talking about infrastructure upgrades.
I think the CRA is now mandating that you have to support it for a minimum of 5 years. So it's also, the reporting dates might change as well. So as you look into the future of this is end of life, you know that the time is ticking from a security standpoint when that announcement happens.
Exactly. So where Providius becomes a critical element now is without live visibility into your network, you don't know what exactly is deployed, right? You don't know if you have shadow devices. So if you have a static inventory for your network environment, you have an inventory based off of what you know to have been built, but you're not entirely sure that all the things in your static inventory, in fact, match your live network, i.e., has everything that we've purchased been installed, right? So maybe some things haven't been installed, therefore they're low risk because they're not actually on our network. Or do we have devices that aren't in our active inventory that we are tracking in Beam, and that's typically referred to as shadow devices? Do we have shadow devices in our network? Someone needed a quick fix, emergency, we have to put this device in to fix this, back up this other device or what have you, right?
Emergencies never happen in broadcast, right? Live broadcast, never an emergency where you grab something off the shelf and from a buddy and put it in.
Right. You never scramble, at the top of the hour, you never scramble to, go live, right? So, and of course, it's human nature, right? You make a quick fix, you add something, and you move on, right? You move on to the next fire. So these things get left behind. They're left plugged in. They're outside of your, visibility from let's say from a static inventory perspective. Now they're lost, but they're still there. They're still live. They're still running. They still pose a viable threat. And I think this is one where if IT or enterprise really teaches us the pains of these types of frameworks or acts, it's that even if you don't maybe rationalize that there is really a cyber threat, let's say, like that you don't believe that there could be a malicious activity that could disrupt your media broadcast. Let's say you believe that you are secure, or you're the one in 1,000 that's never going to have this type of impact. The reality is that in the case of an audit, if someone does come and check and looks at these details, and you're not prepared, or you're not properly documenting, or you're not properly tracking, and they do discover there are differences, then you could be in violation of these acts, right? And so, and I think you talked about levied fines. So there's this isn't just a nice to have. This is a act that is being treated as seriously as a safety concern. So the manufacturer, just like they must make their products safe, and not be able to cause harm, this cybersecurity act is being carried out in the same manner, with the same level of severity, i.e., you must make sure your products are secure, the same way you must make sure that they're safe. And so and as manufacturers know, if you ship a product that's unsafe, there clearly are fines. Well, if you ship a product that is not secure, now there will also be levied, potential levied fines, right? So I think the severity of these things certainly now exposes, the gaps in observability, right? That we talk about, where there are customers who operate with limited visibility or no visibility into their media environments, or they're trying to manage those media environments using IT practices which are not built for operational technology. So there is risk in trying to do these things, by using other methods. But this is where I think, Providius, Beam, we're dedicated to providing solutions specific to a broadcast environment to address these challenges that the manufacturers face, that the integration teams are now going to be facing, as well as the end user.
Do you think manufacturers or integrators are prepared in any way? Do you think they're going to have the infrastructure to, track and communicate, and even when there is a vulnerability, for them to, let's say someone finds a vulnerability, maybe they do, maybe they don't, contact their account rep, the manufacturer. Like, that account rep's got to communicate it to someone on their team that can push it to, one of the governing bodies for a vulnerability, right? The process here. Do you think, obviously in a connected world, which is the vision that we have, is where we know the device, we know what was purchased, we know the vulnerabilities in a single ecosystem, it really automates the reporting and the tracking process between customers and vendors and manufacturers. But I guess today, like, what have you seen from vendors and manufacturers? Have you seen anyone being progressive in this space? Are they thinking about it, or is this going to hit them as a wave?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, like, I'm probably not in the right position to answer that for, on the behalf of manufacturers in this broadcast industry. Like I said, I would assume the ones that operate out of Europe probably are very aware, or maybe somewhat aware. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if many outside of the European Union are not up to speed. Of course, the companies that operate at larger scale, that have more dedicated resources around these challenges, around, like they have dedicated cybersecurity or infosec team members that are looking at these details. I know as a software vendor, we're following specific cyber frameworks, like SOC 2 and ISO 27001, which prepare us for these types of this type of framework that or type of act that's being issued, but certainly not all the frameworks have the same severity in terms of, like, for instance, the reporting, right? So I mean, the CRA is in this act is or policy is stating that the vendor must notify within 24 hours, right? And I wonder how many manufacturers are truly set up, right, to be able to detect or be given notification or somewhere in the world they found out that this product had a vulnerability. And again, it's not just their product; it's the software components with
OEM of exactly, yeah.
right. So it's not like you're not necessarily only aware of your own product. You have to be aware of all the sort of sub products within your product, like all the different software packages that you're utilizing, right? So I would hazard a guess that if we were talking to IT vendors, right, that have been selling their products into the IT market, they're very well prepared and set up, because I mean that is the bar, right? They wouldn't be able to sell their products without being able to meet those requirements. But I think in the manufacturing of broadcast, or the design and implementation of products for the media landscape, security's always been kind of bolted on at the end, right? It's sort of become, okay, we're ready to ship. Let's do some, bare minimum things to secure the product, and let's get it out the door. Even if they've done that much, right? So I think when they realize the requirements now to sell their products into Europe have just become a lot more significant, it will definitely put a lot more responsibility on their shoulders, and they will have to, get good quickly at, building secure products, right? So it's going to be challenging. I definitely see this as a challenge, right? For sure.
Absolutely. And of course, that's where we're trying to sit in the middle and open the communication and start to think about how do we solve this, because it's going to put a lot of, stress on the entire system and make operating costs go up. But
Mhm.
so like the prisoner's dilemma adage, if, we both keep our mouths shut, we get this sentence. If one speaks, the other keeps their mouth shut, the other person gets the high one. But, the goal is like, if we can both come together, right,
Mhm.
across, the owners of the equipment and technology, the manufacturers, and have a way to communicate. I think that's kind of our vision, right? Is how can we facilitate that and save, reduce the risks and the vulnerabilities and automate a lot of the internal process from here. As you look at just, cybersecurity in general, and as Providius is being deployed, are you seeing that it's often coming at the end of a new project, a new build out? Is it coming in after the fact on existing? Have you, existing implementations? Have you seen a shift in that at all? I'm just interested in where does, when are people starting to think about, oh, we need to get on top of cyber? Is it, existing infrastructure, or is it typically like this is almost like you could have part of new build outs these days?
Um, it's a great question. I think in our experience, not what other vendors experience, but in our experience, they're now in many projects, because we do work with many of the largest media companies in the world. So we're working with some significantly large media companies, and clearly they're taking security very seriously. Certainly, we're seeing now on new projects the vetting process from a cyber point of view is certainly become far more significant, in terms of whether we're receiving questionnaires, which is becoming quite common. And those questionnaires are extremely detailed. They're not just about the software or the product. It also are questions about the organization, the company behind the product, right? How secure are our facilities, where our people work from, where we keep our code. The product that ships out the door, obviously is the focus of the CRA, but ultimately, in order for you to achieve or to provide truly secure software, there's concerns about the supply chain side, right? And could your products be compromised before you ship them? And so there's a lot of questions, and that even comes down to physical security. How
Yeah.
secure. So I mean,
Do you think in the future
security
the
is
buyers
a
are going to be more conscious of these types of things when they're making purchase decisions than maybe they used to be, right? And that's the shift is, they're looking
yeah,
up front for these rather than finding a fix after the fact.
exactly. And I'll tell you anecdotally, several years ago, I was doing more projects that interfaced with U.S. government, right?
Hmm.
Whether it was the DoD or the intelligence side, and they had these really strict security requirements, right? Very, very strict. And at the time, it was like, this is a thing we have to go through in order to sell to this client, right? We didn't connect with the why. We only understood we had to be able to check all these boxes in order to sell, right? But clearly, there is a significant reason as to why, these cyber requirements are in place. If in that case that type of customer, right, in their operations obviously being mission critical. So I think the broadcasters also are now getting up to that level, right? Kind of getting to a similar level to what we were experiencing with the government, is it's now started to make its way through. More and more companies, organizations are becoming more acutely aware of the real risks, and that they have to take this quite seriously. This puts us, like I said at the beginning, this puts a very fine point, right? Where now they're levying actual fines. So there
Hmm.
is, financial penalty if you don't, operate correctly, or build product correctly, or ship the right product with the right security controls in place. I think this is very specifically, again, the CR is specifically targeting manufacturers, the distributors, and the integration partners, but it absolutely has an impact on the end user. And I think, like you said, it clearly makes things a little bit more, expensive to build and to support. So that's certainly going to factor in. But it's going to become now a very commonplace conversation, I think. So
And the goal is ultimately to protect the CRA is there to protect the owners of the technology, right? It's not designed to protect the manufacturer anyway. It's designed to protect the owners of the
exactly.
technology from cybersecurity. But if they don't know what they own, if they don't have a way to observe it, if they don't have a way to understand its relationships to other devices and embedded software, it doesn't matter what the vulnerability announcement says if it's in your hands if you don't actually know what's under the hood, right? Is this affected by something that's a vulnerability that's out there, or is it something that you don't actually own?
Right.
Um, Last quick question for you. So I know, within both of our spaces, we hear, some IT device management tools or ITSM type of solutions and tracking devices. Obviously, Providius is providing, not exactly the same, but different functionality and use cases specific to our, broadcast live production environments. Maybe could you talk about, what the difference is and why, more of a purpose-built tool for broadcast and live production is utilized, and what and why some of those, because I've seen it as well where they think these exclusive IT based tools are going to solve all the problems like they do for our traditional IT solutions, but that really isn't the case in our world. Maybe if you could explain what you've seen and kind of the gap that you're filling, and why those tools aren't really purpose fit for these environments that we work in.
Yeah, no, definitely, it's a great question. Um, it kind of, if a very simple response would be, the media environment, broadcast environment, is very time sensitive, right? It's very sensitive to timing. It's very sensitive to any kind of disruption. Employing software for the purposes of observing, that environment, you have to be careful not to be part of the problem, right? So you don't want technology that's going to scan your network, put a ton of extra traffic and overhead or load. You don't want products that are going to add undue, processing to your switch network. So you want to be careful. And it sounds a little odd, but in IT, where 90% traffic throughput on a network is perfectly acceptable, right? I mean, IT initially was developed under laws of averages, right? So if you have a high average of throughput or a high average of uptime, that's good enough because the systems aren't time sensitive so much. I mean, repeat packets is fine. Slower refresh times are fine. So that never really has been a big problem there. But when you move now, you move focus to a different type of environment, and broadcast is an operational technology environment where they're super reliant on the uptime, the reliability, the throughput, the stability, the timing of that network, right? So observing that network, you have to do so strategically and in line with that type of mission critical, mindset and mission, and carry that out carefully without being disruptive. The other thing too is that elements of a media network are different. Just totally different than what IT. Like the fact that almost all media is being carried out using multicast, for instance, right?
Mhm.
Or a lot of the use of UDP. And then you look at 2110 or AS67 or other standards that rely on PTP for time synchronicity, right? To be able to create a universal time reference that the sender and receivers can all see and use as a means of collecting the data, recovering it, and playing it out so that everything stays time aligned. So considering those are major elements in a media environment, and those elements probably don't exist at all in traditional IT environments, again, those are big blind spots if you're trying to utilize standard IT software to manage an environment that relies heavily on components like multicast, like PTP, that aren't even being observed. So, with our focus, those are major elements that we highlight. So we look at it as an application specific solution that helps
Mhm.
identify media flows, timing flows, the synchronicity, the alignment of the things on the network, the performance. We look for impairments, we look for disruptions, and from a security perspective, we look at the attack surface. We look
Mhm.
at what devices are on the network, what ports they have open. We look for those shadow IT devices. We look for rogue devices that have been added or removed. We look at communication patterns as well. We look to see where media is flowing, where control and management is occurring, and are those normal patterns or are those abnormal patterns? I mean, you could detect early a event if you know in your network what's actually happening, right? If you have an accurate inventory and a live view of the network, you can detect these changes or possible attacks that could occur.
Mhm.
Truthfully, a lot of things that occur in networks are usually human error, right? So um, you know it's like there are occasions, of course, where there are cyber events. Of course, that's something that can happen. It is a real problem statement, but more times than not, it's actually human error. It's mostly misconfiguration. We talked about those shadow IT devices adding things in kind of a rush. It's those things that get lost in the shuffle. Something misconfigured, someone updated something, forgot to turn off this port, stop, forgot to disable, or change the root password from,
Yeah.
admin, those types of basic things that, having Providius in place gives you that live visibility into your network, gives you a fighting chance to keep on top of those things, to eliminate those things, or in cyber parlance it would be kind of maintaining or managing your risk surface or your attack surface, right?
Mhm.
Keeping those things in check and at least being mindful of what you do have in your network, and then also how to manage and maintain them. That's significant, right? That's removing significant burden on having manual checks or manual inventory, someone with a spreadsheet walking around, making sure everything is where it's supposed to be and it's connected to the right interface, that your VLANs are configured correctly, that you don't have these open ports. Without observability, none of those things can be truly quantified. You can simply only document what the manufacturer tells you and
Mhm.
hope that those things do get provisioned correctly. The reality is it's human error. It could happen. It happens a lot. So with our software, with our products in place, you can truly observe those details, record those details, and have an accurate ledger of truly what's on your network with log information to show when it happened, how long
Mhm.
it's existed, and also look, if you're looking at like what's the impact, as we talked about, of this
Right.
vulnerability. How is this going to impact me? You can look at the blast radius, right? You can look at what systems are affected by this.
Mhm.
How severe is this? How big a risk is this to our organization? Those are all things that can be quickly answered when you have live observability in place through, for instance, our product line, the Providius product line.
Well, thank you for that explanation. That definitely clarified a lot of kind of some of the open questions on my mind about what the differences are in the core use case, and really it is the kind of the speed and the real timeness of these environments that makes these other tools just not purpose built, really can't solve the problem they have. Well, thank you so much, Jamie, for your time and for being here and chatting. There will be links to Providius.com, their website, in all of the channels that we post this podcast to. If you'd like more information on the CRA, visit cra4broadcast.com. And remember that compliance starts for vulnerability reporting in September of this year. The full compliance is going to happen in 2027 in December. So time is ticking, and we'd love to hear from others that are thinking about the CRA or other ways to apply it. Thank you, Jamie.
Great. Thanks so much, David.